Dr. Maria Montessori, Education and Peace, Chapter 2, For Peace. Men with the best minds on earth gather today in answer to a call to solve life's most urgent problems. Peace is a goal that can be attained only through common accord, and the means to achieve this unity for peace are twofold. First, an immediate effort to resolve conflicts without recourse to violence. In other words, to prevent war. And second, a long-term effort to establish a lasting peace among men. Preventing conflicts is the work of politics. Establishing peace is the work of education. We must convince the world of the need for a universal collective effort to build the foundation for peace. Constructive education for peace must not be limited to the teaching in schools. It is a task that calls for the efforts of all mankind. It must aim to reform humanity so as to permit the inner development of human personality and to develop a more conscious vision of the mission of mankind and the present conditions of social life. These aims must be achieved not only because man is almost totally unaware of his own nature, but also because for the most part he does not understand the workings of the social mechanisms on which his interests and immediate salvation depend. The most characteristic phenomenon of modern life is the sudden change in our social conditions. The outward change is obvious, for scientific discoveries and their practical applications have brought about amazing changes in our physical environment. But this change is perhaps not so apparent at deeper and more essential levels underlying these outward changes in our civilization. This second level on which change has occurred is proof nonetheless that thanks to economic mechanisms and communications, men have, in fact, managed to become united in their material interests. This achievement indicates that new goals have emerged in the field of these interests themselves, and it is necessary that men be consciously educated to fulfill them. For if men continue to regard themselves as national groups with divergent interests, they will run the risk of destroying one another. This is the crux of all the questions regarding peace. As a consequence of these changes, war is now pointless and cannot yield any material profit. The First World War in Europe has already shown that the victors have not gained new energies and benefits from their victory, as victors did in the past. An entirely new phenomenon has occurred. Defeated peoples have become a danger, a burden, an obstacle. The victors must aid them and help them to get back on their feet. A conquered nation today is an illness that all of mankind suffers. The impoverishment of one nation does not make another nation richer. Rather, all nations decline. Destroying one nation is tantamount to cutting off one hand in the mistaken hope that the other hand will thereby become twice as strong. We are all a single organism, one nation. By becoming a single nation, we have finally realized the unconscious spiritual and religious aspiration of the human soul, and this we can proclaim to every corner of the earth. Humanity as an organism has been born. The superconstruction that has absorbed all man's efforts from the beginning of his history has now been completed. We are living this reality. We have proof of it in the almost miraculous powers that today are enabling man to rise above his natural condition. Man now flies higher and more confidently through the heavens than the eagle. He has mastered the invisible secrets of the energy of the universe. He can look up into the skies and the infinite. His voice can cross the world's seas, and he can hear the echoes of all the world's music. He now possesses the secret powers of transforming matter. In a word, contemporary man has citizenship in the great nation of humanity. It is absurd to believe that such a man, endowed with powers superior to those of nature, should be a Dutchman or a Frenchman or an Englishman or an Italian. He is the new citizen of the new world, a citizen of the universe. This being the case, it is no longer possible to assume the existence of nations with divergent interests. Separate nations with their own borders, their own customs, their own exclusive rights no longer have any reason for being. There will always be human groups and human families with different traditions and languages, but these cannot be sufficient reason for the existence of nations in the traditional sense of the word. They must unite as constituent elements of a single organism or die. The great trumpet calling men to rally around the one banner of humanity is a summons on which our very life depends. Today, all men are in touch with one another. Ideas circulate through the air by radio from one end of the earth to the other, recognizing no national boundaries. Groups sharing the same ideas are being formed all over the world, and men can no longer cling to the medieval mentality of the Paleschi and Piagnoni in Italy. Special interest groups, however, are attempting today to take over these enormous powers that henceforth must belong to humanity as a whole. There are only two paths before us. We must either prove worthy of our great achievements or die as a result of them. It is absurd to fight each other for material well-being or national defense or the triumph of one social system or another. Our era is a time of adjustment to material conditions that have undergone vast changes. We have conquered our physical environment and overcome our purely natural limitations. We have mastered invisible powers and taken the place of the Jupiter Tonans of the Greeks and the gods of the Hellenic peoples. But we are not yet fully aware that we have done so, and this is precisely what prevents us from becoming brothers in order that this superworld may become the kingdom of heaven. Man must be educated to realize his greatness and to become worthy of the powers that are his. If in the Rome of the empire, the Roman citizen needed to be aware of his dignity, it is even more necessary that today's citizen of the universal empire become aware of his. The human personality has remained as it was in the conditions of the past. Man's character and mentality have remained unchanged, and he does not understand the destiny and responsibility that he now has because of the new powers at his disposal. Man, in short, has not kept pace with the progress that has been made in his external environment. He remains timid and confused, fearful and susceptible to blind submission to authority, to a return to paganism or even barbarism, because he feels overwhelmed by the superworld in which he lives. Modern psychologists have spoken of the dangers that threaten the individual who is a victim of a so-called inferiority complex. But what can we say of the perils that threaten all humanity because man, the king of the universe, trembles with fear and is so overcome with depression that he is tempted to do away with himself? Our principal concern must be to educate humanity, the human beings of all nations, in order to guide it towards seeking common goals. We must turn back and make the child our principal concern. The efforts of science must be concentrated on him, because he is the source of and the key to the riddles of humanity. The child is richly endowed with powers, sensitivities, and constructive instincts that as yet have neither been recognized nor put to use. In order to develop, he needs much broader opportunities than he has been offered thus far. Might not this goal be reached by changing the entire structure of education? Society must fully recognize the social rights of the child and prepare for him and the adolescent a world capable of ensuring their spiritual development. In order to do this, all nations would have to reach an understanding, to bring about a sort of truce that would permit each of them to devote itself to the cultivation of its own human members in order to find therein the practical solutions to social problems that today seem insuperable. Perhaps the attainment of peace would then be easy and close at hand, like waking from a dream, like freeing ourselves from a hypnotic spell.